HBRIC Ltd update. This may take slightly longer. So I'll ask the HBRIC team up to the front here. So who have we got today? Director Scotland, Director Dinsdale. Good morning. Welcome. We're still morning for a few minutes anyway. Mr. Newman, Mr. Heath. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My suggestion here is perhaps you go through the first part of your prezzo, whether we need to break it down into sections. I'm open to suggestion, really. I mean, if you go through the written part, perhaps, and then we can ask you some questions, and then we'll get back to the finances at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies from Dr. Pearce, our chairman. So Danelle and I are here as of-course substitutes. On-course substitutes. The first comment in the paper is about the David Collins's report last Friday, which I think we'll come back to later on. There's a comment there about the Tranche 2 water, which I think everybody is aware of. If there's any question about that, you can let us know. We've got problems with the EPA Board of Inquiry costs, which effectively we've got no control over. We have done quite a lot of work to see if we can get those costs reduced, and we did get one small invoice written off, and Heath might talk about that later in terms of the finance. So water uptake, I don't think anybody had any question perhaps on the design and construction note. Was there anything you wanted to add? The water uptake took quite a big an amount of time at our last week's board meeting, and we were privy to the database of the farms, the hectares, the amount of water that people are contemplating ordering, the amount of water that has been booked, and then management's review of how all of the properties fitted into the water use, which is how those figures of the 5.425 and the 19.34 have come up. And I think it's quite important. I'm going to ask Andrew to comment, and Danelle may wish to as well, around what step 3 means in terms of the opportunity web, which is really what we are relying on in terms of the figure in this report that says that we look to be getting 25 million whatever they are, you know what I mean, committed water by the end of December. So Andrew, could you just because as I said, we saw quite a lot of detail, yep. But it's quite important just that councillors know what gets you to stage 3.
So getting to stage 3 is when the potential water user fills in a term sheet, identifies the specific contracted volumes, identifies their offtake points, preferred offtake points, identifies their farm management system, identifies the area to be irrigated under what irrigation technique, and all those sorts of issues, and effectively formally requests of us a contract. That's that stage. Now, key point is leading up into that stage, there's a very significant amount of work. To get to that stage, they've been through a full farm management systems review, business case, capital projection in their own business, all those sorts of things. They've often had a technical review from whether it comes from an irrigation company or it comes from, for example, we've identified a person by the name of Tony Davron in this report who does a detailed irrigation review, soil types, climate stations, farm systems type. That process is the point at which these guys have essentially done their business case that they're prepared to enter into a contracting process. So it's a major exercise, it's not casual, and it's very committed. They've already invested a significant amount of money to get to that point. So stage 4 is literally the point at which we've taken those contract conditions, inserted them into contract form, and in the process of sending a water user agreement back to them. Now, I would also say that if the water user conditions vary in any substantive way from the core contract, that is a delegation process that goes back to the board. So in that number of 19.34, I'll give you today's number in a minute. Those are all standard agreements, actually. And the number as of, just to get a feel for the number today, this number is sitting at just under 22 million as of this morning.
So, Chairman, there are other details in terms of the other stages in terms of the deep water transfer, and where we talk about average water use at 3,100 cubes per hectare. There's two variables in this database, and the people that have booked water have essentially done what I would have done too. They've sort of hedged, if you like, in terms of the amount of water that they're applying for to be at the sort of low end of what they might want, but also not at the total hectareage they might want. So if they've got 200 hectares of irrigable land, they might be bidding water for 140 hectares. And so we would have suggested, and when we went through this on a case-by-case basis, you'd suggest that while the people might only be foundation water users for X amount of water, their water take in the long term will be substantially higher than what they're bidding for in this current round. Whether you want to comment, Danil?
Yeah, and I think that it is, as you say,
Your microphone.
okay. It is, as you say, a tactical move. They are showing commitment to the scheme. They're doing what they think they need to get the scheme up, but not committing themselves to the total bill until they've had a little bit more time to absolutely fine-tune what the requirements are. And you know, if this can get away, then their preference would be to actually start farming, understand it better, and then make the extra purchase at a later stage. But in terms of giving us the confidence that the total demand is there, that we need to get the investors excited, and that the initial demand is there that will meet our conditions precedent, we are feeling greatly more confident than we had been before that meeting. We were actually able to see the detail, and I really do have to congratulate Andrew's team for the quality of the database that they've developed. They responded in depth to some of the concerns that were being voiced by the directors of HBRIC about where was the detail, how could we get confident, how could we get our investors confident, and they have built a really first-class product.
Chairman, if I go into the financing, the board at its meeting considered a paper that was actually provided by the BNZ that we commit to $20 million of early work on the detailed planning of the dam, and that we go ahead because they wanted to get the work done, if you like, before next winter, and we're looking for a commitment from us in December to go ahead and commit that money to start work at the end of January. The board turned that down, but we did agree that given the current level of uptake that we would complete and commence the due diligence process, which is the other thing in terms of the Gantt chart, if you've had a look at it, that takes the time. So we turned down doing a whole lot of preliminary work which would have been part of the cost of the dam, and said, well, we're not certain enough yet of the outcome, but we have agreed to spend the money on due diligence, and also, as we said, to go ahead and do some more work on the Tuki Limited Partnership, which was the other part of the money stream. So, apart from the financials, we're happy to have some questions.
Perhaps we stop it there. I've got one to open it up. And I quite like the way you've laid this out in the numbers, as far as you know, turning to uptake. And my question's quite simple, but it might not be. We'll have a go. Where on that list do farmers run into? I'm thinking it's around number 5, and I'll explain a little shortly. Where do they run into the issues of physical ability to irrigate parts of their farm? And I'll give you a brief explanation. Talking to a farm consultant when we opened the cycle trail down there, who's dealing with a whole lot of people around some of the mechanics of what you could use the water for, those sorts of things. And this guy had a real appetite for irrigating, I think, a couple of 100 hectares. But when they got in there, they find they can only get about 80 of it because of constraints such as power lines and all those sorts of things that none of us probably think about until we get down to getting the measuring wheel out and working out exactly where the heck you're going to go. And as an example, to shift all the power lines in one part of the farm was $80,000, and it actually only gave them another 13 hectares. So there's a whole lot of complexities in there that we're probably not aware of. I mean, where do you see those sorts of issues coming to a head in the 0 to 6 line you got there?
The answer is quite straightforward. Actually, it's early. It's really between 1 and 2, because 1, everybody going through this pipeline up to the point that they submit they ask for a contract, has already done significant due diligence, and the first thing they do, that we suggest they do, or my team suggests they do, is they get an irrigating company in to give them a professional assessment of what they can irrigate, what their irrigation options are, what irrigation method, what gear, all those sorts of issues, cost, you name it, and where they can and can't irrigate. So the issue of power lines, pivots versus laterals versus other forms of irrigation are all dealt with at that point.
So
if I can make another comment, there's potential land swaps between owners, so that you go there because your pivot goes over some of my neighbour's land, and I'll swap land with you elsewhere. So the detailed plans that I've seen absolutely go down to, there's the pivot, and we should buy that 20 acres or that 20 hectares off that corner and swap some land to him somewhere else. So does that answer?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So I guess to follow up though, number 5, the agreement with water user and their professionals, you're talking a more detailed or further down the track discussion.
That's a legal review.
Legal review.
Legal
okay.
review. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that starts things off. Right, Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. I think maybe it was a couple of council meetings ago when you came and reported to this council, Andrew, you talked about whether 40 million cubes was the appropriate target any longer, and I'm pretty sure that you said it actually needed to be more than 40 million cubes as a condition precedent. Can you elaborate on that a little bit as to where you might see that number now?
Yeah, sure, Peter. It really relates to the amount of contracted water versus a deep water deal versus a new water deal, and it's a cash flow issue, really. And it's something that a deep water deal is heavily discounted versus a new water deal that's less heavily discounted in the Foundation Water Use Agreement. And you'll note there that we've reported, and I genuinely think this, I think that number of contracted deep water is going to be up at around about 10 million cubic metres. That's higher than we forecast in our base case financial model. I mean, that has some genuine benefits, frankly. But on the other, from an environmental point of view, but it does reduce the cash flow. So I think what the board's going to have to contemplate once it's got a fuller picture, particularly as we get to financial close, is what does that number need to be, and give or take, sort of a rough proxy without having it run through the whole financial model is probably about 46 million cubic metres, roughly. Right. And I have also, I've communicated that sort of number to people on our, effectively on our database as well.
Right, so
Yep.
you haven't, just looking at the numbers you're giving us, the current status, so in fact, although you have approached a potential 40.5 million cubes according to this document, you will need to target.
Yeah, we need to drive it higher.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Okay.
what we've done, and I might just elaborate there.
Yeah.
Now this is like, where do you put your resources? So what we've done in this phase up until the date is what we've looked to do is drive as much. Well, drive's possibly the wrong word, but really try and get as much of the contracted or the likely contracted water demand through the early stages of the transaction and into the contracting phase. So that's where essentially Duncan McLeod and his team have focused 95% of their effort. And that's a known client base, if you want, or customer base. But what I'm now asking them to do, and they're doing it, is they're expanding that conversation into a bigger group of potential customers. which is going to be necessary to get those sorts of numbers, in my view.
Right.
The other sort of, I guess, dynamic we've got going on, but we don't have any real influence over it, is that what we are seeing in the command zone is quite a bit of action around property transactions now starting to occur. And we do I can guarantee you we have the significant external interest in moving in, but it's a chicken and egg process. They've got to have a set of property transactions to move in, but that activity is starting to occur.
So of the 10 million you're talking about, which are the deep water
Yep.
people, that's not people who are taking tranche 2, you're talking
No, that's
tranche 1 water.
Yep,
So these are
tranche one.
people that in 5 years' time have got the option of opting out of this and
Yes,
going back to their deep water.
Well,
if
yes,
they
sort of,
choose.
in a simplistic sense they do. And you might find that some of that activity at that point in time. But what I would say, and this is just the reality of the situation, as opposed to what is a paper allocation in a plan in tranche 1 water. Other than in the northern part of what we call Zone A, so that's up around Tikakino. From as soon as you start migrating south in the Rutenova Basin, the groundwater is not there to be abstracted at those volumes. So already there are two motivations for people entering to a deep groundwater deal with us. One motivation is they genuinely want the scheme to move, and in their long run they think their water and irrigation business is much more secure than it is today as a consequence of that. The other motivation for some is simply they cannot pump the amount of water they consented. They've got no chance. And in fact, actually, they've got significant problems irrigating already. So there's an underlying reality to that behaviour, actually, which is not evident unless you know the specific circumstance.
And can you just remind me what the deal is for those deep water users? They're 10 cents, is that
Yeah,
right?
they're 10 plus 3, so they pay 10 cents for the take-or-pay component of the contract,
Yeah.
and 3 cents variable energy charge.
Yeah. And that's for the first 5 years.
First 5
at
years,
which
yep.
point they go back to the normal.
Yeah, they migrate to a
Contracted
normal water user agreement. But I would also migrate to a normal water user agreement, but they have those, if you like, those foundation water user terms and conditions applying.
Yeah.
Yep.
Chair up.
Pass the baton, Councillor Pye.
Yeah, in the initial figures that you're coming up with or that you're getting at this stage, are you noticing any changes in land use?
To date, and that was a question that we discussed with management, to date things are running virtually as they were proposed in the initial proposal. Very light on new dairy conversion. Some dairy is extending existing areas, but yeah, we're still where we said we were going to be originally.
Councillor Graham.
I've a couple of questions, but I'd like to start with one, and if you could, I won't do them all at once because one's on the financials, and Jim wanted to hold that. Just given that you now have 27 million cubic litres beyond stage 3, and most of that is actually at stage 3. And I heard Andrew's definition of stage 3. It's not actually the definition that's written here, so I just want to clarify that, in my view. But how confident are you, because you've got some other hurdles that have been presented to you, how confident are you that, and you've got January, no one in New Zealand works, so you've got February and March to reach financial close, so what's your state of confidence that you can meet, and I understand it as a target?
Well, I think, through you, Chair, the board's view was yes to commit to the due diligence expense, but not to $20 million of early work. Which does that sum up what our position is? So yes. How confident are we? I guess, and this is going slightly off track. Plan Change 6 is going to come in whether the dam goes ahead or not. And so when that realisation filters through, and perhaps your CEO might want to talk about it, but when that filters through, what will the level of uptake really be? I mean, our team are telling us that there is significant bow wave now, and one by one it does become, what's the word, addictive. You know, it moves from property to property. So we said keep on going with the due diligence expense.
My specific question is, financial close 30th of March, will you meet that current target? That's the current target.
The chart that you've got in front of you is for financial close to the end of March, and obviously it's been helped now by the board's decision, sorry, the judge's decision last Friday, pulling forward from that, and there is a possibility that the Board of Inquiry's booked early days in February, is that right? So, I mean, that's helped us, in fact, because we would have said last week before the judge made his decision that March was not, we weren't going to achieve March.
Can I just have a follow-up to that? Because, and I don't know whether it's Liz you want to address this or you guys. Thinking about the reconstitution of the Board of Inquiry on the matter that the court's thrown back at them, they are going to reconvene in February. They have to get submissions from all the stakeholders. They've got to consider those. I'm assuming that there would be a hearing of some sort where the stakeholders have the opportunity to orally submit. I'm asking. That's not a. Is that correct?
No. Well, I'm not. Through you, Mr. Chairman. We don't know. What the board has to do is to determine the process themselves that they want to run. So. We actually don't know quite what that'll be. They will meet at their earliest convenience now that they, obviously have the referral back, and then will advise us what that process will be.
Okay, so we're guessing at the moment. So, but I don't know whether there'll be an oral hearing or not. But what's got to happen is they've then got to consider those submissions, and they've got to make their final determination on this matter, which we and the water users have to then absorb and work out what impact that might have on their FEMPS. I can't for the life of me see how all that's going to be done by the end of March.
So, through you again, Chair, the board did consider what the costs were of going on past March. And I mean, whether we want to leave that to financials, but there is a continuing figure of something like $250,000 a month. So if we were at the end of June, there's $750,000 of sort of holding type expense. And we have to start worrying about that quite soon.
We also did consider, just as a board, that just because people said that this was the price didn't mean to say that they shouldn't feel some of the pain with us, and that there are a lot of the people that are involved in this activity to get it across the line. My words at the time were, there's no other gig in town. This is what they all want to do. They're going to be judged on this. So there's a lot of will to get this over the line by those various suppliers, and we should use that and not use the currency of money. And I think that is very well understood. And I think that actually that tension may well be very helpful for us, because if we did just keep paying, it could take another X number of months. But I think that you often see in these very large infrastructure deals that is the common thing which happens. And as long as you keep supplying money, then the train keeps chewing along. And we've very definitely sent a very clear message, not only that we weren't going to forward agree to an extra 20 million being spent now in anticipation. This is ratepayers' money. We were not doing it, but that we were very keen for the train to keep going forward, but just not at ratepayers' expense. So I think there is an understanding of those issues, and the judge's decision coming as it did has given us a lot greater confidence that we can still get there. The chief executive.
You must be a Fisher person to be so confident.
The chief executive is right.
A white bait.
The chief executive is right in terms of the court. We don't know what the Board of Inquiry will do, but certainly the High Court decision has given every indication that it does not need to be a long process and should not be a long process. So we feel comforted by that, but yeah, there's always the element of doubt.
So if I, yeah, sorry, Chair, but, so if this does push out to June, because at the end of the day, it's a little bit out of our control. It just depends on how long the Board of Inquiry process takes and what it spins out to us.
Yep.
If this does go to the end of June, just in terms of the construction and the timing, Andrew, does that change anything?
I think Councillor Bev and I have had a conversation with the board that, I need to be, I'll tell you generically, so I'm not going to be too specific because there's some commercial issues embedded in this, but within reason, we think this is a management view, we emphasise that as well, that there's some fairly sensible geotech work, for example, that can be done that relates to the construction season window, and subject to being able to finance that. If you took the hypothesis that the board of inquiry process, the regulatory process tuned on past March, you ended up with a April, May, June scenario. Then provided some of that work's done, then the whole construction sequence, critical path is on track. So we've got to solve that puzzle, and I think it's fair to say that I won't have a very relaxed Christmas because I suspect the board here will be asking me that question on the 19th of January, or ahead of that, actually, about 7 days ahead of that. So I mean, it's another iteration we're going to have to raise with the council at the right time, I think. Yep.
Councillor Belford.
There hasn't really been any mention yet of the extent to which or not you feel the High Court decision is complicating the actual uptake process. First of all, could I ask, of this 5.4, I would assume all of those are still actually conditional on there being a satisfactory.
Absolutely.
So all of these are conditional
Yes.
on that.
Yes.
That is what is still up in the air. It would appear that what the High Court, I guess, reprimanded the Board of Inquiry on was inadequate consultation with the parties involved once it made a change of position. So it doesn't seem like the message delivered is let's have another expedited process here. There's going to be an attempt to arrive at some other decision, presumably, or recommendation, and then some effort to hear what the parties respond to that, and then that arguably is open to litigation. So the question is really, I'm just flabbergasted that you sound as optimistic as you do that water user agreements are going to actually get assigned that are unconditional in the next first quarter of the year or even 6 months of the year. Can you explain
Is that a
your
question?
optimism?
Is that a question?
I want to
Wants
first
to
of
know
all,
why you're so optimistic, John.
why are you so optimistic?
Yes.
It's a better state of mind.
Yeah. It's because it's nearly Christmas. Well, the other alternative is to stop spending money now, isn't it? That's the reality of the situation. So we have got approved expenditure from you to get us through until the end of March. Although we've got these couple of overruns that Heath has mentioned in his paper. And so, as Danelle said, we're actually going to other parties now to say, you've got to bear some of the pain. You've got to bear some of the pain with us. If we do have to spend some money past that we haven't got allocated, we have to find some other ways to get it. And so we've said to management that 19th of January we're meeting, and he has to have come up with some ideas as to how do we do that, so that hopefully by the 29th of January at your meeting we're not saying, can we please have another $1.2 million? Is that how I would answer the question?
Well, it partly answers, but you've identified 40 million cubes in the pipeline, which at least as it stands at the moment, if my math is correct, you'd have to convert 100% of those to meet your target.
Yes.
Plus, if
That's
it
about-
goes up to 45 or 46 more still. And I guess we are going to get to a financial discussion, which it sounds like you're saying we can defer till January. And you would expect some movement against those numbers between now and
Can I?
29th of January?
Can I just say as a farmer that, the farmers will be working in January. So we will be making some progress during
It's
January.
just the orchardists that knock
So,
off, is it?
perhaps I'll, without identifying the specific transaction, the specific property, I sat in my office at 9:30 this morning, had a farming enterprise, substantial farming enterprise, effectively move into stage 3 for 800,000 cubic metres of water. So I wouldn't suggest that people that are planning on their businesses are saying that absolutely the Board of Inquiry decision, the High Court decision is the end of the process and we'll all stall and stop, because exactly that behaviour wasn't evident this morning. So the basic attitude we've got is we will continue onwards. Those agreements are conditional. I mean, it doesn't make the process easier, but I think what you'll find is that irrigators or potential irrigators are still planning on an irrigated future business.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. Question for you, Andrew. I'm receiving some feedback from irrigators and potential irrigators, and you've outlined the process that they've got to date to have that water user agreement on their doorstep. One of the comments I'm interested in you drawing out is, right, you've got it to stage 3, it's with them now, and I can speak to one in case who he received his agreement 10 days ago. So I'm wondering if you can just give a bit of appreciation for the process that he's got to undertake now, because he was quite keen that I understood it and brought the attention, the understanding to my colleagues. And I'd also like to pass on a comment that he was very, very clear that under his farming system, with Plan Change 6, he can farm successfully with irrigation and meet the Plan Change 6 requirements, but not successfully without irrigation, because he has the ability to control his inputs and his nutrients and his crops. So I'm interested if you can just draw that out a little bit in some of that process and with the people you're dealing with.
I think so once the signed agreement is with a potential water user from our end, that's the point at which I guess they're looking to make sure that they absolutely have their financing nailed down. That involves an accountant's discussion for some, not all. Certainly involves a banking conversation, and to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the enterprise, actually it involves a legal review. So, we find some. I've got one bigger potential water user that's in the middle of the legal review. So those are the sorts of things, and that becomes, if there's any substantive departure from the terms and conditions and the standard agreement, that goes back to this board. That's the process. So, so there's just it's a transactional time frame issue to some degree that we're in here. And I would also just emphasise this though. I haven't really targeted major resource from my team into making sure we get that part of the transaction moving quicker, and within reason that's one question mark I've got through to the new year, whether I direct more resource into that. Sorry, can I just maybe pick up on your point, Councillor Hewitt, around irrigation? Irrigator systems are far more efficient at managing nutrient inputs. Absolutely. And I think that point should not be underestimated.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And
Wonder if we can get some clarification on a couple of issues that were brought up earlier in the day, and that is around the water user agreement and the FEMPs. There was a view expressed that HBRIC would not be interested in constraining the environmental demands of the FEMP because of their desire to sell water, and probably related to that why does the water user agreement actually not tie the users to the environmental outcomes? I wonder if you could clarify for us the difference between the water use agreements and your regulatory constraints.
Yes, so it's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy here. If I could draw it for you, but I'll try and describe it. You've got the regulator sitting there, regulating the plan change, and also regulating the consent, and they are regulating the Ruatana for water storage consents. That's the point. So every farm environment, every transaction at the water user level that we enter into, down at the scheme level, has to meet a set of conditions as per the jargon, the FEMPs. But equally, that on aggregate, all of those farming enterprises, all of their nutrient management issues need to add up and fit within the regulatory frame at the scheme level which the regulator regulates. So there's no way around that. In actual fact, the regulator's got, I would argue, under this scenario, has got more influence and control over the process than they do on an individual by individual transaction.
Mr. Mohi.
So rather than make a statement, ask a question. Does HBRIC appreciate that the $8 million mitigation package that Tamatea signed with you, do they appreciate that we haven't held our hand out once yet?
Well, the CEO who's had those conversations directly, Chairman Mohi, absolutely appreciates that point.
Right, let's go around again.
So this is a question that arose this morning that our legal advisors couldn't help us with in regard to the water user agreement. I'm sorry, I've lost my track of thought. I'll have to come back to it. Oh yeah, the 5.5 cubes, the agreements you've entered into, the water user agreements, in how many of those cases is it also the landowner who's the contracting party?
Oh, I just have to think there. Well, off the top of my head, Councillor Bevan, I think they all are. Actually, just think about who I know is in that mix. Yep.
Are you saying that of the 5.5 million cubes contracted, it's all secured by the landowners as well?
Those parties who've signed those contractors are the landowners. Is my understanding off the top of my head. I'd have to go back.
You need to be very sure on this because.
Well, I would put it this way. I know exactly who they are.
No, but
and I know the underlying arrangement of the tenure. Okay.
Well, why would a water user put his land up as security when he's not obligated to?
I think, Councillor, the point is they've signed a water user agreement with the terms and conditions as per that water user agreement. You had your solicitor's review this morning. That security involves a letter of credit.
Not the land.
Not the land. Okay. Councillor Belford.
Sorry.
What is going to be the process now? I'm not sure. I guess everybody's a party to this. HBRC and HBRIC are parties to responding now, I guess, to the High Court judgment. From one point of view, we proposed a position that the Board of Inquiry had trouble with. Then the Board of Inquiry proposed something, and we intervened, that the High Court had trouble with. So what is our approach going to be to formulating a position on what we do think the proper regulatory regime should be? And is it contemplated that we councillors will have some input into that position before it's offered?
Before I hand the question over to your CEO, the judge has come back on exactly the points that we as HBRIC thought that he would come back on. And because they came up with if we're allowed to say it now, the Board of Inquiry came up with something which, was unworkable in terms of the overall catchment.